It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was unpacking my son's lunchbox like I always did, checking what he'd eaten, tossing the wrappers, smiling at the crumpled little dinosaur napkin he always tucked away like a secret. Then I saw the note. Folded, a little damp with juice, tucked beneath his half-eaten sandwich. Not in my handwriting, not something from school, just a short, childlike scrawl on the back of a spelling worksheet. It said, "Mommy, please don't let Daddy take me again. I don't like when he whispers bad things to me." At first, I thought it had to be a misunderstanding, a nightmare he'd had, something taken out of context. Jason, my husband, his father, could be cold, sure, strict, maybe, but this? I wanted to believe there was some other explanation. But deep down, something had already been telling me for months that things weren't right. That note was the beginning, the spark that set fire to the life I thought I understood. And what I discovered after that changed everything. Not just how I saw my husband, but how I had to protect my child from him. We were the kind of family people smiled at in grocery stores. Jason in his crisp button-downs, me with my neat tote bag and color-coded shopping list, and our 6-year-old son, Ethan, trailing behind with a superhero backpack and a toothy grin. We looked happy, safe, normal. And for a long time, I believed we were. Jason and I had been married 8 years. We met at a friend's wedding, one of those whirlwind love stories that make sense when you're young and craving stability. He was charming, composed, knew how to make people feel like they were the only one in the room. I used to think that was a gift. Now I know it was control. He worked in finance. Long hours, high stress, nice paychecks. I left my marketing job after Ethan was born. Jason had insisted it was the best thing for the family. I wanted to believe him. I told myself that being home meant I was doing the right thing, being present, being dependable. But slowly, I became invisible. At first, it was small things. He started making comments about how I handled things emotionally, like when Ethan cried after scraping his knee and I instinctively rushed to soothe him. "You're teaching him to be soft," Jason said. "The world isn't gentle. Why should we lie to him?" I brushed it off, told myself he just had a different parenting style, that we'd meet in the middle, but there was never a middle with Jason, only him deciding and me adjusting. He never hit, never yelled. He didn't need to. He led with silence, disapproval, strategic compliments. He'd go days without engaging unless it was something he could correct. He praised Ethan when he showed strength and looked disappointed when he cried. Even at 6, Ethan started holding things in, apologizing too much, sleeping with the light on when Jason was home late. I noticed it all, the subtle shifts, the way Ethan shrank when Jason entered a room, the way he avoided hugs, flinched when corrected, or watched me anxiously from across the table when Jason was speaking. I tried talking to Jason about it. He shrugged. Boys need to learn discipline. Stop coddling him. You overthink everything. He made me feel like the problem, like I was creating issues out of love. And after a while, you start to believe the person who insists they know better, even when your instincts are screaming. Because he wasn't cruel every day. That's the trick. He could be thoughtful. He'd leave flowers on the counter, schedule dinners, hug Ethan when other people were watching, enough to convince the outside world, and sometimes even me, that we were fine. But love doesn't leave bruises on the inside. And I started to feel it, that quiet ache of something being very wrong, without knowing exactly what. Until the note. The note was my son's cry for help. One sentence, crumpled, simple, devastating. And finally, undeniable. After I found the note, I couldn't sleep. I laid awake that night with the paper still folded on my nightstand. Every few minutes I'd reach over, open it again, and reread the same words as if they might change in the light. They never did. Mommy, please don't let Daddy take me again. I don't like when he whispers bad things to me. It was in Ethan's handwriting, slightly crooked, with a backwards N and the word please squeezed too tight between the lines, like he was afraid of writing it, but more afraid of not being heard. Jason was asleep beside me, breathing slow and even, like the world wasn't about to cave in. But mine already had. Still, I didn't act immediately. I was afraid of being wrong, afraid of making a mistake, and that's what manipulation does. It doesn't just silence you, it makes you doubt your own instincts. I kept asking myself, what if this was just a misunderstanding? What if I confront Jason and make things worse for Ethan without proof? So I watched, and I listened, and suddenly, everything I'd brushed aside began to sharpen into focus. Ethan had started acting out a few months before the note. Nothing major at first, just small tantrums, sensitivity to sound, crying when he had to go to his dad's office on boys' weekends. Jason always called them bonding days, and I never questioned it. Jason said he took him for ice cream, taught him how to ride his bike, said Ethan just needed to toughen up. But Ethan had begun wetting the bed again. Not every night, but often enough for me to notice. When I brought it up, Jason's face turned hard. You baby him. That's why this is happening. He needs structure, not sympathy. I started keeping a notebook, writing down little things, patterns, Ethan flinching when Jason raised his voice. The way he'd ask if I was coming with them, even if it was just a 5-minute errand. The way he whispered, "Can Daddy stay downstairs tonight?" And then immediately pretended he never said it. One day, I walked past the playroom and overheard Ethan talking to his stuffed animals. I paused outside the door, heart thudding. "You're not dumb, you're just a kid, it's okay to cry," he whispered to his toy. Then, as if mimicking someone else's voice, harsh, clipped. "Only weak boys cry. You want to grow up weak." I backed away before he noticed me standing there. I couldn't breathe. The worst part, I recognized the tone. I'd heard it before, in Jason's voice, when he was angry or disappointed. It was always low, restrained, but cruel in its own way, like a slow leak from a poison valve. Still, Jason was careful. He didn't say anything in front of me. Not the cruel things, not the twisted lessons he was whispering when no one was around. Until the bedtime incident. It was late. Jason had taken Ethan upstairs after dinner. I said I'd join them soon, but I lingered. Something in me told me to wait. And then I heard it. From halfway up the stairs, just outside Ethan's door. Jason's voice, soft, controlled, terrifying. "You don't tell Mommy everything. You're not a baby anymore. And if you make me look bad again, I promise you, you'll regret it." I stood there frozen, not moving, not breathing. Like if I made a sound, it would snap whatever awful illusion he was casting. Then Ethan said something back, barely audible. Jason replied, even softer, "Good boy. That's better. We don't need her knowing everything, do we?" I left. Quietly, I went to the kitchen, turned on the faucet so it sounded like I was getting water, and when Jason came down 5 minutes later, I smiled like nothing had happened, because now I knew. This wasn't in my head. This wasn't me being emotional or dramatic or projecting, like he so often claimed. This was calculated, intentional, abuse, just not the kind with bruises. The next morning I installed a small nanny cam, hidden behind a row of books in the playroom. I told Ethan it was to see his superhero moves, but what I really needed was proof. I didn't expect the camera to catch anything right away. Jason was too calculated for that. He knew how to perform, how to keep up the facade, but I didn't need a dramatic moment. I just needed one slip, one sentence that confirmed what Ethan was too scared to say out loud. It took 3 days. 3 days of watching my son shrink under Jason's expectations, of pretending I wasn't watching everything unfold from my phone, while Jason read bedtime stories and kissed our son goodnight with poison still on his breath. The footage was subtle, but damning. One night, while brushing Ethan's hair back from his forehead, Jason leaned in close and said, "You don't need to tell Mommy about everything. Sometimes it's okay for boys to have secrets with their dads. That's how men are made." I paused the recording, rewound it, played it again. It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening in tone. But it was there, a deliberate erosion of trust, a soft, deliberate manipulation. The next clip was worse. Jason was helping Ethan with homework, a basic math worksheet. Ethan got one question wrong, and Jason didn't raise his voice, but his smile disappeared. "You want to be a loser like your cousin? Because this is loser math. You want people to think you're dumb?" Ethan stared at the page, eyes wide, silent. Jason pushed the pencil back toward him. "Fix it, and stop sniffling. You sound like a girl." I sat frozen in my kitchen, holding the phone like it was made of glass. My stomach turned. My fingers were shaking. This wasn't discipline. This was targeted, personal, strategic. He wasn't raising a child. He was dismantling one. That night, I made a copy of every video and uploaded them to a private folder. I printed out screenshots. I matched the timestamps with my notebook entries, Ethan's moods, his anxiety, the wedding, the nightmares. It all lined up. Then I opened the file I'd been too scared to look at before, Jason's cloud backup. He had synced his second phone to our iPad once, months ago, briefly. It was a mistake he didn't realize he made, but the cloud never forgets. What I found made everything worse. There were texts between him and a woman I didn't recognize, someone from his office. The conversations weren't romantic. They were cold, practical, planned. "She's losing it, documenting everything. It'll be easy to flip this when I file. As long as I have Ethan, the court won't care what she says. I'm setting this up to win. Just need her to crack first." She replied, "You need to start recording her. Play the long game." I stared at the screen, horrified. Jason wasn't just gaslighting me. He was building a legal case to take full custody. He was trying to frame me as unstable, unfit, emotional, the overwhelming mother. He wasn't just trying to manipulate Ethan. He was trying to erase me. And he'd almost done it. I didn't sleep that night. I copied every file, every message. I backed up the nanny cam footage to 3 different cloud services. I emailed it to myself. Then I made an appointment with a child psychologist, one who specialized in coercive control and trauma in children. We met that same week. After showing her the video, the messages, and Ethan's drawings, she sat back in her chair and looked me in the eyes. "This is abuse," she said. "It may not leave bruises, but it will leave permanent scars if it doesn't stop." I nodded, because I already knew. The psychologist didn't waste time sugarcoating anything. "If this continues," she said, "your son's development, his ability to trust, to form healthy attachments, it's all at risk." She used the word coercive control like it was a clinical diagnosis. And suddenly, that word, one I'd read in articles and brushed past in headlines, became terrifyingly real. Coercive control, not bruises, not belts, not broken bones, just words, tone, repetition, subtlety. The slow poisoning of a child's sense of self by someone who calls it parenting. I went home that day and cried in my car for almost an hour, not out of fear, out of anger, not just at Jason, but at myself, for letting it go on so long, for second-guessing what my body and soul had been screaming at me for months. But I didn't stay in that guilt. I used it. That same night, while Jason worked late at the office, I sat at the dining table with every piece of evidence, printed, highlighted, tabbed, the note, the video clips, the screenshots of his text messages about framing me, bank statements showing the second phone he bought, and a timeline matching every documented incident with Ethan's change in behavior. Then I called a lawyer. Her name was Nadine, a woman I'd found through a domestic advocacy group online. She specialized in high-conflict custody battles and emotional abuse cases. I told her everything. There was a long pause after I finished. "You're ahead of where most women are when they come to me," she said. "But I'll be honest, this won't be easy. He's smart, he's strategic, and the courts don't always take emotional abuse seriously." I asked her, "But do we have enough?" She didn't hesitate. "We have more than enough." The next few days were a blur of preparation. Quietly, carefully, I filed an emergency petition for custody. Nadine helped me request a temporary protective order, not just for me, but for Ethan. The psychologist submitted a written evaluation. We compiled every email, every file. The court reviewed it in 48 hours. And then it happened. Jason came home like any other night, loosened his tie, kissed my cheek, asked what was for dinner. I told him calmly, "There's something I need to give you." I handed him an envelope, thick, legal. He opened it. Petition for emergency custody, restraining order request, evidentiary exhibits. At first he didn't understand. Then he looked up, and I saw it. Not fear, not regret. Rage. Controlled, simmering rage. "You're doing this to me?" he said, voice low. I said nothing, just looked him straight in the eye. "You tried to erase me," I said. "You tried to scare your own son into silence. You don't get to hide behind fatherhood anymore." He stepped forward like he wanted to say more, maybe even scream, but I was already dialing Nadine on speaker. "She advised me to inform you calmly that law enforcement has been notified. If you violate this order, they'll handle it." He didn't pack a bag. He didn't ask to say goodbye to Ethan. He just left. No drama, no last word. And that told me everything I needed to know. Ethan woke up the next morning asking if Daddy was at work. I told him he's staying somewhere else for a while. "But you're safe now. No more whispers. No more secrets." He looked at me, and I swear I saw relief in his tiny face for the first time in months. "I knew you'd help," he whispered, and I almost broke right there. But I didn't, because I couldn't afford to break anymore. I had to protect him from the man who tried to control him, and from the version of myself that stayed silent too long. The house felt different without him. Not quieter, just lighter, like someone had finally opened the windows after years of holding their breath. At first, Ethan asked about Jason a lot, where he went, when he'd be back, but not out of longing, out of fear. like he needed reassurance that his father wasn't hiding somewhere, waiting to come back and whisper more poison into his ear. I told him the truth, carefully. Daddy said some things that weren't okay, and until he learns how to be kind, he can't be here. But that's not your fault. That's not on you. He nodded slowly, like he didn't fully understand, but trusted that I did. That was enough for now. We started therapy together. Ethan was hesitant at first, shy, withdrawn, but the therapist was gentle, patient. She never pushed, and eventually Ethan began to speak about how Jason would make him sit in silence for training, how he wasn't allowed to cry even when scared, how he wasn't supposed to hug me too long because men don't need that much love. He thought all dads did that. He thought it was normal. That realization broke me. But it also steeled me, because now I had no doubt. What Jason did wasn't just wrong. It was dangerous. And if I hadn't stepped in when I did, he would have buried that damage so deep inside our son, it may never have surfaced until it was too late. Legally, the court granted me full temporary custody while the case moved forward. Jason was ordered into supervised visitation, pending a full psychological evaluation. He tried to fight it, of course, claimed I was manipulating the court, that I was turning Ethan against him. But you can't argue against your own words on video, or your own texts about setting her up, or your child's quiet, heartbroken voice saying, "Please don't make me go with him." He lost, and I won. But this wasn't the kind of victory you celebrate. It was the kind that comes with silence, exhaustion, and tears that you cry in the shower when no one can hear. But still, it was victory, because Ethan was laughing again, because I could sleep at night knowing no one was whispering threats in the dark to the person I loved most in the world, because for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to walk on eggshells in my own home. I started to rebuild, slowly. I picked up freelance work, reconnected with my sister, joined a parenting support group, not the kind where everyone pretends their life is Pinterest perfect, but the kind where people talk about fear and healing and boundaries. I told my story, quietly at first, then more openly, and women came out of the woodwork, strangers, friends, neighbors, saying, "This happened to me too." He never hit me, but he made me small. Thank you for saying it out loud. That became its own kind of purpose. Ethan and I still have hard days. Trauma doesn't vanish just because you name it, but he hugs me more now. He says I love you without looking over his shoulder. He brings me little notes in crayon that say things like, "I like our house now," and I tape them to the fridge. Because those words, those quiet, honest words, mean more to me than anything I've ever owned. The note I found in Ethan's lunchbox changed everything. It shattered the version of my life I thought I needed to hold together, but it also saved us. My son found the courage to speak, and I found the strength to listen and to act. He doesn't whisper anymore. He laughs, he sings, he shouts, and every time he does, I think to myself, that sound, that joy, that's what we fought for.